If you didn't know better, you would think that I was making this up because it's just too absurd. But Maria Zakharova was just calling for an International Day Against Russophobia. Russophobia must be fought, she said. Here it is in the actual article. Zakharova calls for the establishment of an International Day Against Russophobia. International Day Against Russophobia should be established, she said. This was stated by the official representative of the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, during a speech. The diplomat drew attention to the fact that January 20 – oh, no, this gets even better. What's the day that she proposes for this? January 27th is the International Day of Remembrance of Victims of the Holocaust. She wants to co-opt that day as the International Day Against Russophobia. Why January 27th, she says? Because on that day, the Red Army, the Soviet troops, liberated the concentration camp, one of the concentration camps. It's a great meanness to honor the victims and consign to oblivion those who saved and stopped this factory of death. Great meanness. There's no forgiveness for this, and there will never be, believe me. I mean, that she could put those words in that sentence like that is just, it's mind-boggling, the irony. I believe I've become increasingly convinced of this in recent years, that there should already be an International Day Against Russophobia. Quote, because Russophobia is the same extremist, Nazi, and today neo-Nazi ideology that kills people in the literal and figurative sense of the word, she said. Now, a little bit more. Why do I think Russophobia really needs to be fought as a phenomenon? Perhaps among other things, I think that historians and public figures can say this better than me, but also because our country, our ancestors sacrificed their lives to stop Nazism and fascism. And they, among other things, above all, deserve that Russophobia never becomes an ideology, and in some cases, even a state ideology that has this place on earth. Well, you know, it's kind of like saying that you want this is it's almost like saying you want self-esteem without doing the thing to get the self-esteem to begin with. Like what's going on that Russophobia exists? I mean, as you define it, that people don't like the Russians. There's a reason, and then this spawned a number of memes here. Russophobia works with Reagan and Pope John Paul and Margaret Thatcher. And then this, I think this commentary nails it. The reason Russian culture is so comfortable with genocide, this is the reason okay, so let's stop there. This is the reason that the Russophobia that you're so upset about is existing, because you're crossing international borders into Ukraine and killing hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands, at least hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians. Stop that. And then people will just happily ignore you again. Hey, the reason Russian culture is so comfortable with genocide is because Russia plays the victim while committing the most heinous crimes, but hasn't had an opportunity to atone the way Germany did in 1945 through the Nuremberg trials. That's right. That's exactly what's going on. Help, help, I'm the victim. Everyone is Russophobic. They hate me. Well, yeah, and then you got to realize that they were in colonial in the African sense, but they span 11 time zones for a reason, because they colonized their neighbors. War crimes, human rights violations, genocide, state-level corruption, invading other countries, human rights violations, destroying political opposition, crimes against humanity. Yeah, but they play the victim and act like that, right? Aide to President Putin, Nikolai Patrushev, said something pretty interesting, that the current actions by NATO look very much like a scenario of full-scale aggression against our country. Again, they're playing the victim. I mean, that's what this amounts to. Now, they play this, okay, and they'll look at things like this. Russian flag is trampled and burned in Tbilisi by protesters opposing the participation of Russian fencers in the World Championship. There's a reason that the Georgians are upset because of what you've done to their country, right? And then they put this thing out the other day. I talked about it twice already, but it's worth doing again. Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia put this out, and this is a second one. This isn't even the first one. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, as part of the USSR. Oh, they were so great. We poured all this money into them. That was the first thing that they put out. Dozens of factories built, high wages, population growth after 1991. Population shrunk by 17 to 33%. That's from immigration. Okay. Economies marginalized in the EU, industrial decline. Yeah, like it was all dreamy when they were part of the Soviet system, but now they're just a sad backwater. How backwater are they? So Want a long and healthy life? Stay as far away from Russia and communism as possible. Here's a chart of life expectancy, 1961 to 2019. Life expectancy for the Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. After 1991, it all shot up from an average of something about 71 years to 69 years as an average to 78 or 74 to 78. That's just because they left the Soviet Union. Okay, or the Warsaw Pact countries, under the grip of the Soviet Union, I should say. Okay, here's another chart. Key economic indicators 1990 to 2023 of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And they'll show you in 1990 what it was. And then they'll show you, okay, so life expectancy was 69, and now it's 79 in Estonia. Life expectancy was 69, and now it's 75 in Latvia. 70 and 77 in Lithuania. What about HDI? HDI went up dramatically, 23, 25, and 22%. What's HDI? Let's look at this. So this is Human Development Reports, and this is the UN. Human Development Index. It means a long and healthy life. It means knowledge. It means a decent standard of living. And you can only plug in 3. So I put in the Russian Federation, Estonia, and Lithuania. And who do you think is higher or lower? Here's the Russian Federation, and here is Estonia and Lithuania just above that. This was not a good game for them to be playing. GDP per capita went from 3,000 back in 1990, 3,000 in, where was it, Estonia, and 2,800 in Latvia, and 2,800 and change in Lithuania, to 31,000, 24,000, and 28,000 respectively. And getting away from the Soviet Union was remarkably good for them. Unemployment, 7%, 9%, and 9% in the Soviet Union, and now it's 5.6, 6.8, and 5.1 respectively. Like, okay, there's a reason why the rest of the world is not all that into you. Okay, it gets to this point. The era of neutrality may be over. Austria talks NATO membership. Austria has been neutral since like 1955. First time in decades, Austrian Foreign Minister told Die Welt that Vienna is ready to discuss abandoning neutrality and joining NATO. Well, I mean, you're like in a protected pocket where you wouldn't have to, but they're still realizing like Russia's problematic. The reason, she said, is Russia's increasingly aggressive policy. Neutrality alone won't protect us, the minister said. Austria declared neutrality in 1955 after the withdrawal of Soviet and Allied troops. This status was enshrined in its constitution, though the country cooperates with NATO and through the Partnership for Peace program. Russia was in the Partnership for Peace program, so they're still in a neutral kind of position. Here, a little bit more, she implied that Austria's joining NATO can be a subject for discussion in Austria. There's no real demand for it. It's not that I wanted to go in with flying flags in NATO, but we cannot sit back and say if we do anything to anyone, nobody does us anything. That would be naive. The world has changed. However, I would like to say explicitly that we already have a partner in the EU that protects us in an emergency. At the same time, we make a significant contribution to European security. In this respect, Austria's neutrality has already changed noticeably since its accession to the EU in 1995. So even Austria is talking about this now. Like look at where Austria is and why. Because of Russia's aggressive policies. Austria is pretty protected. I mean, Austria, and then there's Switzerland that are like in the middle of EU. Nobody's going to be really attacking them easily, right? And then there's another thought that I want to talk about here. So Hungary, why is Hungary so like cozy with Russia? Well, I've heard that, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they pined for an age of empire and that sort of thing. But Austria is not like that. So what's going on here? It's a really interesting shift. Be interesting to see Austria go in, become a third NATO country since Ukraine was invaded by the Russians. That'd be ironic. Okay, Prime Minister of Serbia has said that Serbia will not join sanctions imposed on Russia as long as he remains in office. Now, I'm telling you that because another Serbian minister, the integration minister, European integration minister, Serbia stated that Serbia would actually support sanctions against Russia if Serbia became closer to becoming an EU member. So, like, even E2 Serbia, right? Okay. Now, let's talk about the next big story. China component and manufacturing equipment supply for Shahed has improved. China is more directly providing components to Russia. This according to the Institute for the Study of War, probably aided by a direct rail link to China near Yelabuga or Alabuga. I don't know exactly how you pronounce it. I see it spelled two different ways. Integration of Chinese components, where before there was a supply from Iran, means that manufacturers now have a lot more available parts. Now, I'm not sure what's going on here. In this video yesterday, I talked about how is China secretly bleeding Russia dry. It's a shaky alliance. Now, we know that China doesn't want to see Ukraine win or doesn't want the war to end because they want to keep America's interest tied up there. But I think they might also, like, if you haven't seen this video, go back and see that. I think they also want to not make Russia win, or not necessarily lose, but not win. They want to bleed Russia out. And I make the case. Tell me what you think about that. Okay. Fully Chinese-made drone found in Ukraine for the first time. Absolutely zero resistance from the West against this axis of evil. Absolutely no resistance at all. Okay. Next week, Ukraine will adopt law guaranteeing the independence of the country's anti-corruption agencies. President Zelensky has announced. According to Zelensky, he discussed the issue with European Commission Ursula von der Leyen and today signed laws on ARMA reform and factoring and key conditions for EU aid under the Ukraine Facility Program. The Europeans were actually going to hold back $1 billion because they weren't making the progress. Now, this interesting article in the Kyiv Post, making sense of the messy week in Ukraine, was very enlightening. I highlighted a couple of paragraphs. What a mess of things Ukraine's highly respected wartime president, Volodymyr Zelensky, and his less admired immediate entourage made of things last week. That's true. And most people hold Zelensky in higher regard than his entourage. In an abrupt and sneaky move, the president's office, known as Bankova Street, the street on which it's situated, it's like Pennsylvania Avenue for the White House, and their docile appointees in the government and faction in parliament, servant of the people, attempted to emasculate the country's vital independent anti-corruption agencies, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. This sent shockwaves not only through Ukraine, but also among Ukraine's strongest supporters in the democratic world. And their supporters pushed back in a big way, just like the protesters did in Ukraine. Faced by an immediate and widespread protest at home and strong criticism from abroad, Zelensky was forced to retreat and implicitly acknowledge he made a serious mistake. Well, that's good. I'm glad that he acknowledged that and tried to fix it. To his credit, after becoming president in 2019, Zelensky moved to clip the wings of these self-absorbed magnates, the oligarchs, and in one way or another has either reduced their influence, removed them, or brought them into line. So that's good. And he really was a reformer. He didn't get as far as he wanted to be, but he really did try early on. What has begun emerging in the meantime is an oligarchy in the very basic sense of the word, which means a rule by a small group of people. But that's not oligarchs like in Russia talking about the oligarchs. It's just the technical meaning is a very small group ruling. And I think that's one of the problems that Zelensky actually has. He's very reliant on his small group of advisors, and they're all from his faction, and that's a help and a hindrance at the same time. Unlike Winston Churchill, who he's been compared to, Ukraine's war leader did not opt for creating a government of national unity. On becoming prime minister in May 1940, Churchill formed a British government of national unity, which included members from Labour, Liberal, and Conservative parties. I think that would have actually been a really helpful thing if Zelensky had done that, because most of the resistance that he gets is from the opposition parties. The ensuing massed widespread protest revealed an impressive level of democratic awareness, showing that the spirit of defiance and resistance to despotism, injustice, and Russian imperialism inherited from the Revolution of Dignity, the Orange Revolution, and even the Student Revolution of Kyiv in 1991 lives on and remains strong. And I think that that's very fair, that Ukraine is or will be on the other side of this when the new bill gets passed, stronger democratically than what we even thought it was. Now, that's assuming that it gets passed. Zelensky's MPs balk at restoring anti-corruption bodies over revenge fears. Well, we'll see what happens with that. They have to pass this bill. I mean, if they don't pass this bill, it's just that'll just be nuts. Okay. So that's it with that. I just want to look at this commentary from J.P. Lindsley. He's a journalist who's been in Ukraine for the last 3 years. The heart of Russia is the Kremlin. Absolute power. The heart of Ukraine is Maidan, or public square, the place of democracy, a rejection of absolute power. And this is what I call the architecture of freedom. What's central in our cities really does matter. Yeah, I think that's a really profound insight from JP. All right, just a couple of memes and we'll be done. On the way to the Black Sea Fleet inspection, here's Putin in a submarine. And yeah, if you know what I'm talking about here, Navy Day parade was canceled. This was my daily brief this morning. And yeah, okay. And in this, the world has changed. Austrian official signs openness to NATO membership, and Darth Putin saying, I remain a master strategist. Yeah, that would be the third NATO country since he invaded. And then finally, socialism. This would be better if it was labeled communism. But nonetheless, you get the idea. So good that people climb 15-foot high walls and risk being shot to escape from it. Yep, that's right. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.